So digital transformation is the subject for today. 30-minute insight webinar, 45 minutes maximum. Perhaps just if you can just be a little bit flexible, that would be great. I'm Tony Wakefield. I'm the training director for the Informa Telecoms Academy and also the Innovation Academy. We've been doing a lot of work on the next steps with telecoms companies over the last 5-10 years. Obviously, over the last 5 years, the word digital and digitalization comes up more and more. Telecoms operators looking at where to go next in terms of their customer proposition, and where to go next in terms of an organization. It is absolutely fundamental, and we just get into lots of conversations about these sort of subjects with some of the top operators, Singtel, MTN, Vodafone, just trying to get a much clearer picture of the way ahead. So that's the subject really of this webinar today. We're going to take a snapshot of some of the major themes from digital transformation, and we're going to do that via the vehicle of one of our training courses, which is our Positioning for the Digital Age, a mini MBA training course. 5-day executive training aimed squarely at communication service providers and telcos, highlights emerging opportunities in the digital age, but secondly defines two things: transformed positioning in terms of how they make the best of the digital opportunities themselves as an organization, but how they also position to help other industries and other organizations transform and make the most of those opportunities, if you like, positioning themselves as an organization that understands best practice of digitalization, not just connected innovation and digitalization, but so some of the organizational aspects as well. And of course, if you worked in the realms of sort of IT and enterprise, you know that a lot of that is related very closely with business processes. If you're familiar with the telemanagement forum, you know that increasingly platforms and IT and the way in which companies are run and organized completely overlap. So for us, we've been sort of evolving towards these sort of topic areas in terms of our focus, just really mirroring the industry. We don't do a lot of advertising on these webinars, but just to let you know that we've got training programs around positioning for the digital age. We've also got others like the Telecoms Mini MBA, Effective Telecom Strategies, Mini MBA for High Tech and Digital, which takes us beyond the telco and into adjacent industries, and a Mini MBA that focuses purely on innovation. So quite a comprehensive offering, plus dozens of other courses which are technical in nature or business oriented. So in terms of the agenda, what we're going to look at today is the need for transformation, transformation in the customer, business models, the organization or people, and making it happen. And to me, having delivered many executive programs for some of the top telcos and others, bullet points 4 and 5 there to me are by far the most important. You can have some fantastic plans in place, you can understand your market to the nth degree, but unless your teams and your people and your organization is set up to help you achieve your goals and your strategies, it's pointless. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the major themes and just sort of try and seed the thought process in terms of transformation. And some of you may well have done a lot of work on transformation, others not quite so much, but for those who are familiar, perhaps just use this as a sanity check and perhaps just try and grab 1 or 2 new ideas. For those for who it's new, hopefully it'll just give you a snapshot of the sort of work that organizations are going through really to transform for the digital era. So the need for transformation, the competitive environment in telecoms is massively competitive, and that defines the nature of our industry. Growth is generally flat, data revenues still increasing, but again that's starting to level off. Internet traffic the amount of usage that customers are driving through the internet is increasing at a massive rate. So, we've got a business model based on revenues from usage largely, and costs which are also largely based on usage, and that model is really creaking at the seams, and it's increasingly difficult to get the margins that we're looking for in terms of profit. So operators using that current business model, we're tweaking it. We're trying to get the most out of that current business model. So we're focused on things like certainly mobile operators on device strategy, pricing and bundling. For all sorts of reasons, we're looking at convergence and multiplay, not least to try and really nail our customers in terms of loyalty and making it difficult for them to leave, but also giving us the opportunity to upsell them from one set of services onto a second. We're adding content and TV, and you could argue that one of the only areas perhaps where we can add value and charge for it is around things like national TV rights for sporting events. That would be a good example of where a telco could really add value and charge a significant increase in prices to the customers if they have the rights for the national sports events. One thing is absolutely true is that telcos are starting to focus on B2B segments, enterprise and industry verticals. Now, industry verticals, I sort of hesitate because we are starting to talk about it, but to be honest with you, if you are focusing on, for example, the healthcare sector as a telecoms operator, you would expect that you'd have people who understand the healthcare vertical. But very often, if asked that question, how many doctors have you got working within the telco organisation, and the answer will be zero. To me, we're really not serious yet about supporting these other industry verticals, and that's really what digital transformation for a telco is largely about, not only making the most of digital techniques for themselves, but trying to support these other industry verticals. We've got enablers like Internet of Things, digital services, the platforms, the services that go behind that as well, and increasingly we're starting to get this partnering thing sorted as well. We're starting to get a little bit better at partnering, but I think the overall theme is that we need to transform. We need to recognise where the industry is going, not just the telecoms industry, but the telecoms and connected, if you like, the connected initiatives. So things like connected innovation, connected cars, transportation, smart cities. We need to realise where the overall industry is going, and we need to be able to take advantage of of transient opportunities. So we talk less about sustainable sources of competitive advantage, more about things like transient sources of competitive advantage, which means we really need to get agile. We need to be fast. We need to respond quickly. We need to be completely customer centric. We need to understand the customers. We need to be able to put in place partnerships really quickly. And to a large extent, this is all based on within our organisation's culture, innovation, performance, getting the right KPIs in place and aligning those verticals. And telecoms operators have not been great historically in many of these different areas. We need to transform and look at new business models and align that with strategy, because, as I said, it's fundamentally clear that with a business model based on usage, without usage is going through the roof and the costs associated with it are climbing massively. We can only reduce those costs or bring in efficiencies to a certain extent. We need to be looking at new business models as well, and 5G as well. Now, 5G is quite interesting because 5G is probably the first G that really starts with the business, starts to look initially at how we might monetize some of these opportunities going forward, starts looking at usage cases, and then only then, when we've got some clarity on that, will we then start looking at the technology. So the need for transformation is it's clear, and to me it's really clear amongst the top operator groups that they need to transform pretty rapidly. But what is it that we're transforming to? You hear the word digital, and one of the most difficult things that we ever try and do is answer the question, what is digital? This is an extract from a McKinsey and Co article. I think this sets it out really well, actually. What is digital? And they say that it's a way of doing things. So creating value at the frontiers of the new business world, creating value in the processes that execute a vision of customer experiences, building foundational capabilities that support the entire structure. So it's wide ranging, but it's a new way of thinking, a new way of doing things, a new way of approaching the customer, but always with that value thing in mind. So that's probably what digital is. It in the context, or digital in the context of perhaps this graphic from Ovum, which shows really simply that business disruption, the way things are changing, will increase over the next decade. So they've looked out to 2025 and they've tried to define the industrial landscape within telecoms and adjacent industries. One thing is really clear, which is that the disruption cycles, new things coming in, the time frames can get shorter and shorter. And of course, you've got massive telecoms companies in place with all that organisational momentum. It's really difficult to change even some of the small things, let alone the way we think and the way we act and the culture. It's quite difficult to even just change some of the small processes that aren't even going to affect the customer. One KPI that we sometimes throw out in some of our executive training is, for example, how many signatures would it take to spend $100,000? And I think we've been certainly up in the 20s quite often. Sometimes we're down at 3, and if you measure agility, if you've got some way of measuring it, what you find is that it manifests itself in this way. Can a business unit within a big company be bothered to grasp an opportunity of that magnitude given the amount of signatures and the hassle they'd have to go through internally? And that's the way it would manifest itself. So we need to think about going digital in this context, rapidly accelerated disruption cycles. And of course, we know many companies that have failed to recognise disruption, failed to recognise which way the wind is blowing. Even now, we're sort of looking at print media and looking at advertising revenues, and they're just going through the floor. Whilst meanwhile, online with Google revenues mainly through advertising and search is going through the roof. So that's happening right now. We've got lots of examples within telecoms, some really big disruptive cycles that have come through over the last 20 years. As big as the introduction of the internet, the introduction of mobile, the introduction of sort of online organisations like Netflix. Things that fundamentally change the nature of a business. So these are just some examples of companies that fail to adapt to those disruptive cycles. Telcos are quite proactive in some things and very reactive in other things. So when we say telcos, including some of the more advanced communication service providers, but they're very proactive in developing and introducing new technologies on which the business used to be based. So it used to be that you bring in a new technology and you're actually bringing in a whole new business model and cost structure, and everything sort of came in together. It's not quite that simple anymore. So we are pretty proactive still in terms of the actual technology itself. We are fairly proactive in trying to develop new sectors and segments. We are more reactive. Sorry, it's just slipped. It's supposed to say more reactive to things like national authorities. So if, for example, in Australia, where the national broadband network has been introduced as an infrastructure company on which telecoms operators then sell their own connectivity services. or things like introduction of virtual network operations or new licenses were quite reactive to national authorities and even adjacent industries. What about in South Africa, where the banks have introduced mobile, telecom services, and it fits really well. So we've been thinking within telecoms that perhaps mobile payments and mobile banking is where we go next. Meanwhile, the banks themselves are thinking, well, actually, we've got all these customers, they are very loyal, we've got a trusted brand, we're going to get into telecoms. So we are, in telecoms, we're quite reactive in some ways, and reactive and proactive in probably the technology. One absolutely key thing here is that we need to understand the customer. I think the first thing to say is that there are lots of different segments within telecoms, and some of the greatest success we've had over the years is really with the consumers. So this side, left-hand side of this line, so you've got families, you've got business people. However you, as a telecoms operator, cut your customer base, I think we can say that consumers have been a massive focus, and we've had certain elements within our own organisation, perhaps dealing with enterprise, or more recently things like machine to machine, but really understanding automotive and where driverless cars and connected cars are going next. Can we really hand on heart say we understand those industries? Can we really hand on heart say that we understand logging, for example, somewhere like Papua New Guinea? If you look at Digicel in Papua New Guinea, for example, Digicel got a fantastic opportunity to help the logging and the shipping industry, for example. Really specific stuff that if you weren't such a big telco focusing on consumers and B2B, you'd have an opportunity in your own right there, which would be massive. And yet, in terms of corporate culture, it's very difficult to look beyond consumers, and perhaps we're looking at businesses and enterprise as not an add-on anymore, but perhaps a sort of super consumer almost, rather than coming at it from the customer's point of view. What is it that a logging company would really be interested in? You could probably start from their point of view. It would be things like obviously knowing where the trucks are. It would be safety. It would be security. It would be probably weather and road conditions. You could actually come at it from their point of view and really help them make the most of opportunities going forward. Some of which traditionally we sort of call digital opportunities, i.e. the way in which they engage with the customers, but other parts of it is just looking at what's happening in terms of the digital age, full stop. Just the whole movements behind robotics, artificial intelligence, connectivity, all that sort of stuff, and saying, look, as a telco, are we well placed to help these guys in the digital age? So it's about understanding the customers much better, and really staying, thinking outside the box. I love this diagram. It's just a drill. People don't want to drill. People want a 1/4 inch hole. That's what they really want. If we can get that sort of change of mindset, or at least that sanity check every single time we approach a new customer segment that might be significant for us, you'll really understand them. Address the fundamental value drivers for each segment. Align organisational and ecosystem resources, our actual resources, not just our own resources, but perhaps us being at the centre of an ecosystem of partners where we can call on that capability from our partner organisations. People often talk about big data, and they talk about volume, velocity, variety, veracity, analytics, and taking those analytics and generating insights. But insights are no good unless we actually act on it, and you can only act on it really if you understand and engage with the customer and understand what it is that the customer actually values. So if it's, for example, if it's a consumer, customers might value status, belonging, confidence, experience, and sort of pinning the emotional drivers to each of those segments and each of the types of buyer within an organization. We can do a lot with big data. Big data allows us to take a huge amount of information analyze it, but it's only going to work if we're looking at the right thing and applying it in the right way. How many times have you seen consultants come into your organization, analyze things, but actually come up with the wrong conclusions, look at the wrong things, and implement things in the wrong way? And even further than, do they actually talk to the right people internally before they even start choosing what data it is that they're analysing? So big data and big emotions should help us build and evolve our customer propositions in the right way. And you can actually look at the marketing as well. I mean, to a lot of people, digital transformation is just about marketing. In fact, I'll be honest, we've changed the name on one of our courses recently just because we want to make sure that we get the right people on the training course, because digitalization and the digital age is a huge subject area. But sometimes people talk about digitalizing or digital transformation just in terms of the marketing and the way in which you engage with the customers. And of course you can look at that, and telecoms need to do this as well. We need to get better at facing our customers. And so our Ovum analysts within Informa, they've done a lot of work on these sort of areas, and they've sort of charted out to 2020 on this diagram, looking at marketing automation, looking at implementing digital marketing platforms, and that's where we think we should be right now. And then next step, really a fully integrated commerce platform, not just one that takes credit card payments, but one that's integrated fully with all the business systems internally as far as it can be, and making use and analysing using big data and really maximising our customer proposition there. In terms of business models, this is one of the absolute key areas to get right: understanding value and understanding how to get that value exchange in place in the right way, so that you're offering the right value to the customers whilst charging the right money. But the problem is that business models quite often are broken, and you see this. You can look at the Fortune 500 companies over the last 50 years. Look how many of them are still there on that list. They build a very successful business around a very successful business model, but then they fail to transform, or they fail to adapt, or they fail to build a second business alongside the first business. Because disruptive business models, or things that the customers like better, can gain traction very fast. And they can be based on new customer propositions, new technologies, purely brand, new or different cost structures, new entrants with different and better alignment to customer value drivers, and existing business models are adapted to new segments or sectors. And I think if we sat down in a room together, probably for the next couple of hours, we could identify some threats to the telecoms business readily, easily, and we come up with multiple ideas. The problem with business model disruption is that they make existing business models irrelevant, obsolete, or less attractive. And sometimes for those customers who are looking at alternatives, our own business model becomes very less attractive very, very quickly. For others, it might take a couple of years, but there are ways of actually assessing it and looking at the trends. This is key to me. They're often enabled by the attitude to risk, i.e., who is it that's come in with this new business model? Is it a few people, the old cliche, in a garage, who are effectively in startup mode, so they've got nothing to lose and everything to gain? And you might have 100 separate organisations like those. One of them will do really well. But what about the legacy business models? So have you got accountants within the organisation who would be horrified if you spent $200,000 on a venture which doesn't work? Would that be a real issue? So what is the attitude to risk within your own organisation? The The business model disruption, often enabled by the size and agility of those doing the disruption and those with the legacy business model, i.e. how fast can you change direction? That's the key thing. So I think it's true to say that business model disruption is probably everywhere in and around telecoms and adjacent industries. What we've got to be really clear on is what our business model is now and what it should be going forward. We need to absolutely define the who, the what in terms of the customer value value exchange, the how and the why, i.e. how do we make, what is it that we're trying to make from this, and inevitably it's going to be some sort of value. It could be profit or it could be another form of value, but we need to be really clear on this and spend a lot of time sort of defining this. So the who, are we actually focusing on the right customer segments? What is the value proposition? What is it that we're providing for the customers, and how are we doing that? What are the channels? How do we deal with customer relationships, key activities, key partners, cost structures? What's our success criteria? Do we always need to make profit? And actually, when you look at Tesla, last week I believe Tesla became more valuable than General Motors, despite the fact that they only sold a few tens of thousands of cars compared to General Motors millions. What is it within Tesla? Well, what is the success criteria within Tesla right now? It probably isn't profit, given that they're not profitable yet. And given all of that, what are the right key performance indicators? Is it all aligned with the overall strategy? And how do we maximize success? What are we looking for in terms of our sources of sustainable or now transient competitive advantage? So that brings us really to the organisation, because we've got to try and make all of this happen. And unfortunately, we're left with this concept of DNA. The DNA of a company is established during its initial stages and modified by internal and external influences. And the bigger the company gets, the more difficult it is to influence that DNA. Generally, it reflects the values of the company's founders. It's experienced and perpetuated by generations of employees via the company's DNA. It can be transformed by new people with new ideas, disruption that invalidates business models. And the one that's really difficult is proactive, forward-looking strategic decisions. So difficult to get this in place because of corporate momentum. But if we want to transform, if we need to transform, perhaps this is a good model to start with. We've got our current position, we've got the future position down here. The current position, we can probably optimize it. We can get ourselves to a place which is we could describe as best practice. Horrible term used in the business world, but are we doing things the best way? But then we need to look at transformation, and it comes probably in 4 areas. 1 is overall strategy, 2 is corporate culture, 3 is the customer proposition, really clear definition of that, and then 4 is the enablers. In our case, within telecoms, it's the business enablers and it's the technology enablers. All of that within the context of the changing customer requirements and pressures from the market. And in the context of this, which is company momentum. If you've got revenues, profits, success, however you manage or measure your success, if you get to this point here, if you get onto the backside of this growth curve, you're in real problems, because if you can imagine from there to there, you're going to expect a decline in profit or revenues. Now, when the accountants get hold of this and see the decline, they're going to try and minimize it. So of course they're going to take the costs out. The problem is that the costs come out of what we very often term in inverted commas the non-core elements. So it'll be things like people attending conferences, it'll be research and development, it'll be training, all the stuff that could possibly generate growth in the future. All that ideation, all that innovation, all that thinking time suddenly gets cut from the organization. If you're on the back end of this curve, it becomes really difficult. some really good examples over time. I mean, Steve Jobs was able to take Apple from the back end of this curve and get some growth into it. But how could he do it? How could he overcome the company momentum? Probably because he felt a sense of ownership. It was his company to start with. And he had permission to do it from the employees, from the shareholders, and he could just get on with it. He was a strong character. And when we're talking about digital transformation, then this leadership element is a massive part of what's required. It's getting the right leaders in place who are willing to throw everything at it and take risks. There's lots of ways of sort of looking at, for example, digital strategy. This is Source Strategy and PwC. 6 guiding principles for designing digital strategies from these guys. Design for 3 years out, build for today. So, just make sure that you get something of value in place so you can start creating value from it. Apply Agile in its purest form. Strategy, design, technology. Get Agile. Quick, focused, fast. Give your people the authority to spend money and invest. Get end user feedback early and often. In and around that are things like minimum viable product. Just get something out there, start getting feedback. Obviously, you've got to do that in a way that makes sense. Produce a lot to learn a lot. Diverge, converge. If you're not sure where the business models are going, hedge your bets, but do it in a very structured way. Seek commercial engines, not point solutions. Really good example here is, we used to, as telcos, we used to design a lot of fairly innovative services, and then along came the App Store, and other people developed those services for us. Because when you look at it in terms of statistics and the people who could actually hang things on the App Store, it makes no sense for telcos to develop point solutions anymore. So 5 is about that. You put in place a really good flexible billing system rather than buy a service off the shelf with a fantastic billing system already in place. Right, give yourself flexibility, and then keep technology in the background. Customers, for example, as a cellular operator, bear in mind that customers love Wi-Fi. 80% of all internet traffic on smartphones come over Wi-Fi. So keep the technology in the background. It shouldn't really form the basis of the business model going forward. I think that's the message. So some good guiding principles there. One that I really would push is this. KPIs, your key performance indicators. What is it that you are measuring and awarding performance payments on? I mean, there's lots of KPIs that we've used over the years in telecoms, but have you really got anything in place to measure innovative practices, customer leadership, maximising partnership potential, future-proofing the business, dealing with disruption? Have you got anything in place that can measure that? And until we get that in place, then we haven't got a cat in hell's chance of aligning those verticals within the organisation. So a little bit more from McKinsey & Co. The next stage, build networked organisation. Open the organisation and manage the ecosystem. Establish structures that foster innovation and truly leverage global talent pool, and upgrade skills to world-class levels. And it all looks fairly simple, doesn't it? Nice words on a slide, but when you look back into your own organisation, are you actually doing any of this to the right sort of level? And would you describe what you're doing in these areas as best practice? It comes back to that corporate momentum again. In terms of the people, our people, we need to think about the competencies that we need. For example, the European Union have done some fantastic work on digital competencies. So we've got a whole digital competency framework from the European Union that identifies different job functions and titles, not just for telcos, but across high-tech and digital industries. But fantastic for telcos to sort of look at and tick off and sanity check against, because actually what we'll find is internally within our own organisations we don't have the right people with the right competencies in the right place. And when I say competencies, I mean knowledge and skills and the confidence to use them. Blimey, most organisations are not very competent when it comes to digital skills, the digital business skills. So are we doing anything as an organisation to write that? Sometimes people say, yes, we are. We've brought in consultants. You've really got to think carefully about that, because consultants are short term. They're not going to be in place forever, and a big part of any sort of consultancy project has to be transfer of skills and knowledge. So competency in the right place. They've got to be motivated and led and rewarded using the right KPIs with the right sort of work environment, and in that I include innovation, creativity. Now, I've done some work over in Mountain View in California, seeing how some of those companies work, and it's completely different work environment in terms of the job that the people do. The job that people do is not about a specific project, but it's about the company. So we will get a project up and running, and at some point we will assess it. And if we think it's going to go, great, we'll put all the effort into it. If it's a no-go, kill it, move on to the next project. And we just don't see that in telcos. In fact, so much so that telecoms operators pulled the investment out of research and digital service development internally and put a lot of their money into Silicon Valley, into those startups, because of the work environment. So we've got to have the right people with the right competencies, motivated, with the right attitude, deployed correctly, and then supported. And there's only 4 boxes on this diagram. And again, looking at most telcos and a lot of the conversations that I have with management teams and the rest of the Telecoms Academy team as well with the management teams, again, these 4 boxes are just not handled in the right way within telcos. And certainly as we move from the previous business model to the one that embraces much more digital transformation, we need to get proactive. The HR needs to be the key enabler in a lot of ways for the telecoms operator being able to transform. You're only transforming through your people. And then we need to assess as well. We need to make sure that we do assess the right things and constantly improve our capability to not only transform but to maintain a sustainable business model going forward. And it's about getting the right environment in place with the teams doing the right tasking, and the individuals need to be operating in the right way as well, and supported. So just final few slides, just making this all happen. You can split it. You can look at different areas that need to be looked at, but we would use a model of something like this, where we look at different areas that need to be looked at in terms of the customer strategy, which then sort of decompose into corporate culture, emotion, innovation, buy-in from the workforce, which then decomposes through the customer proposition and the focus. Then along the bottom there, you've got the enablers, platforms, processes, and operations. So any sort of transformation is usually we need to put boundaries on it. We need to understand the scope of it, but a lot of them will touch on different areas from within each of these boxes, inevitably. We need to look at the actual execution of it, because we can have some fantastic ideas, but we need to make sure that this actually gets done. So, is there a sense of a shared future? Have we got buy-in from the board and senior management teams? Have we committed? Are we actually engaging with the workforce? Are we actually executing this? Have we got measurable points for this transformation exercise? Are we evaluating the right things? Are we using the right people, the right data, and the right metrics? Not necessarily consultants, Are we evaluating the right things internally and externally? Have we avoided all cognitive bias? Have we challenged assumptions? We need to be really aware of this. Have we defined a coherent plan of action? Vision, include some quick wins. People need success. Have we developed and aligned structures and goals? Have we built our capabilities? Have we got the right teams doing the right things? Have we built missing capabilities, either internally, partnerships? Have we bought those capabilities? And time to get this all in place would be some of the key things to look at there. Are we able to build an innovative culture? And are we communicating in the right way and evaluating the progress? And one thing that I like from a lot of our leadership trainers always talk about how we operate, but we need a real sense of outcome, but with flexibility. We need to be aware of what's happening externally and internally, and we need the right rapport. And they're probably the 4 keys to success, not just in transformation, but pretty much in anything we do as a business or even as an individual. Really good example is perhaps Disney. We just use this as an example because in terms of transformation, continuous reinvention, how about that? The CEO is also the Chief Digital Officer. The board has technology experience from Twitter, Cisco, Apple, BlackBerry, Facebook, Starbucks. Brand building and synergies are absolutely key. Things like Marvel. If the Disney brand is a bit old and tired for older customers, then they're coming up with the new brands, the Marvel brands, for example. They invest in digital. They've got their own venture capital program. They develop a lot to learn a lot, and the customer is at the centre of all the initiatives. It's quite a good case study, actually. So in 43 minutes, we've looked at the need for transformation and the customer, business models, the organisation or people, and making it happen. And that was just a very quick snapshot, really, of some of the major key themes that we look at in our positioning for the digital age training course. Of course, we're going to a lot more depth, there's a lot more examples in that, but